Hello, Blue Jays fans. Welcome to episode 250 of the Jays from the Couch radio podcast, coming to you live on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, streaming live, episode 250 every Sunday at 7 p.m. We'll be coming at you live, so if you haven't already, you need to subscribe. You need to follow us on Twitter at Jays from Couch or check out our Facebook page, Jays from the Couch as well. We've got a great episode for you this week. We are going to talk to Ed Camus of Empire 161, a Yankees Blue Jays podcast for your listening pleasure. It's going to be great. I'm going to offer him a challenge to convince me that the Yankees are as good as everybody says they are. It can't be true. It can't be. But I'll get him to prove how it is true, or maybe it isn't. We'll see. Anyway, we're at episode 250. I'm your host, as always, Sean Doyle. You can follow me on Twitter at Doyle JFtC. Listen, a couple of reminders before we get going here. As well as our podcast coming to you live every Sunday. I almost said Saturday. Every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We've got two awesome yet unique shows for you on our YouTube channel. We've got the On Feck Circle hosted by Steve Feck, coming at you on the On Feck Circle every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget, send him your questions or comments at US of Jays on Twitter, and you can find the US of Jays Facebook on Facebook as well. Send him some questions and comments, and you will be guaranteed to get his unique, often off the wall, if you will, replies. And as well, for a more positive experience, check out Sunny Side of the Dome on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on our YouTube channel. Karen Sutar, the only person I've ever met to be able to combine logic and fandom all in one ball. She does it like nobody else. Karen Sutar, Sunny Side of the Dome, Thursdays at 7. Send her your questions at Karen Sutar1 on Twitter, and she'll be happy to include you in her show. All right. This week, I'll be joined by Ed Camus here. I'm going to bring him in a minute. We're going to talk to him about the Yankees and the Blue Jays. We're going to talk about, maybe Stanton, maybe Aaron Judge, maybe some Gary Sanchez, maybe what the hell is going on with their starting rotation. Whole bunch to talk about, and maybe I'll just jump right in it. So, joining me, he's waiting in the green room, taking advantage of our complimentary open bar. Here he is, Ed Camus. Good evening to you, bud.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Not a whole lot. So, by way of introduction, Ed, you host the Empire 161 show dedicated to the New York Yankees, as well as Granny's Peach Tea, all of which are brought to us for our enjoyment by popculturespro.com. I highly recommend those of you watching now on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, or listening to our audio podcast on Google, Spotify, wherever you find it, check out popculturepros.com. Ed, I need you just for a second, for our listeners at home, explain to me the Empire 161 title and Granny's Peach Tea.
All right, so Empire 161 was a show that we just started last season. Myself and my buddy Tim Tabala, who's all over popculturepros.com. I mean, if you know Pop Culture Pros, you know Tim. I mean, he does wrestling, he does New York Giants, and he was like asking me about doing the Yankees. And I don't know, for a while I was just like, I don't know, I'm busy and stuff, because I actually go to a ton of games. And then then we had quarantine, COVID hit and stuff, and then he was just like, let's go, the season's gonna come on, what do you think? And I'm like, all right, let's do it, let's give it a shot. So we got it started last season, and our name, the Empire 161 show, is interesting because there's 1,000 Yankees podcasts, like we were talking previously. There's a bunch of Blue Jays podcasts, but down here there's a lot of Yankees podcasts. They've been at it for years and stuff, so we were thinking, what can make us different? And as the Yankees are known by, the last, decade or so, like referring to us as the evil empire and then everything. And Tim and I are both Star Wars guys too. We're like, let's just adopt it. Let's just embrace the whole thing, and we'll just be the Empire 161 show. So that's where the Empire comes in. And then the Yankee Stadium is on Jerome Avenue and East 161st Street in the Bronx in New York City. So we were like, all right, 161 Empire, smashed it together. Boom, we have a name for our show. And so it's been great. We're dedicated to the Yankees. We do talk about other baseball in general because we have a little segment called This Week in Baseball, which is taken from the show that most of us grew up watching. So we do our Schwib notes to kick off. We talk about baseball. We get into the Yankees. And then in the offseason, we talk Star Wars. Like we did Mandalorian. We started reviewing The Mandalorian. After the Yankee season was over, that kicked off. And the show doesn't stop here. So in December and in November, we're talking about Star Wars. And it was a blast, man.
Awesome. And I have to ask, Granny's Peach Tea. I think I asked you before we went on air, but you've got to let everybody know if I'm going to introduce you as a co-host of a Granny's Peach Tea, you're going to have to explain that.
No, absolutely. So Granny's Peach Tea is also presented by PopCulturePros.com. And it's a show that we focus on superhero shows, like comic book shows, comic book movies, that whole genre. It's turned into its own genre now. Like you got horror, you got action, you got comedy. Comic book movies are its own genre, so that's what we focus on. It's a weekly show I host with my buddies Tony Stabile and Jason Fashetic. As much as we're baseball nerds, we also like comic books and stuff, and too. So we're like, let's do it. Let's talk about it. And the title, Granny's Peach Tea. If you're familiar with the stuff, in Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice, there's the scene with the senator and Lex Luthor, and she talks about pissing in a jar and calling it Granny's Peach Tea. And you're like, what a perfect name for a show dedicated to this genre. So we have embraced it, and we're about to do our 7th episode this week, and it's a lot of fun, man.
Nice. Now, if you're not going to name a podcast that it might be a good name for like a fantasy baseball team or something like that.
Exactly.
Right? But in my experience, Ed, and I'm sure yours is the same, that baseball nerds are always a nerd about one more thing, at least one more thing, right? So clearly that's yours.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move in. Let's talk about the New York Yankees. And behind the scenes, I told everybody at Jays from the Couch, I said, listen, guys, I'm going to do a podcast this week. I've got a guy coming in to talk about the Yankees. I'm going to do my best to hold back my feelings, my personal feelings about the New York Yankees. So Ed, before, I guess right now I'm telling you, I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to apologize up front just in case.
I appreciate it, but it's all right, man. It comes when you're a Yankees fan. It comes, as popular as we are. We also know that on the other hand, people got some issues with us, so it's all good. And if you got to name the evil empire, you embrace it.
Yeah, you would have to. And if we're talking about issues, I'm your guy. So. Actually, you know what? Let's throw it to one of our viewer questions here right off the bat, if you don't mind, Ed. Since the passing of Hank Steinbrenner, how involved is the Steinbrenner family in baseball operations?
The Steinbrenner family is heavily involved. Hank, unfortunately had passed away. They had a moment of silence before the game against the Blue Jays today, a spring training game. They had a moment of silence for him. But Hal Steinbrenner, his other son, he's adopted to business. I mean, he is the owner. I mean, their daughter also is involved in it as well, George's daughter. But Hal is the one who's been the principal owner, and he's taking control of the team. He's a very numbers-oriented guy, not really like George. George was very much like, sign me the biggest names, get the names for Broadway, the spotlight, and all of that. Like, let's just spend it all. Let's do it. And it's true, and that's fine. And George did a lot of good. And listen, George was a mixed bag, especially for someone my age. In the 80s, he wanted Dave Winfield. He wanted this. He wanted that. It didn't work. He just wanted all these like superstar all bats but no pitching, and that's what the Yankees were in the 80s. And then once he got suspended, and then the rest of the organization took a hold of it. It's like, all right, now the baseball guys are going to start doing their thing. That's when the 90s dynasty was born. And ironically, it was like, no, you don't trade Derek Jeter. You don't trade Bernie Williams. You don't trade Mariano Rivera or Andy Pettitte. You keep them, and you build around a core. And that's kind of what the Brian Cashman, and that's what Hal Steinbrenner has adopted. Like, that's what we need to get back to. Like, getting that and like building from the farm system along, and you sign what you need. But Hal's been great, and Hal's also said that he's a numbers guy. He's like, for $210 million or wherever the luxury tax goes to, that's what we can. If you can't field a championship team for that, then something's wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, something's wrong. You shouldn't have to go to $300 million. Like the Dodgers have blown through the doors and stuff and everything like that. You shouldn't have to do that. And I can respect that. It's like, he's right. I mean, he is. You do need to do your homework, do your scouting, invest into player development. And that's what he's done. And it hasn't produced a championship since 2009, but they've been competitive though for most of that time. They're in the playoffs, they're in the mix. But right now they got to get over that hump.
Yeah, and I would argue too, based on the last few years, that you also need to be able to pull off some rather lopsided trades.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you do. I mean, some of the things Cashman has done has been tremendous, like trading for Luke Voit. I mean, we gave away spare parts to the Cardinals, and then you get a guy, Luke Voit, who mostly no one's ever heard of, and then boom, he's banging 25, 30 homers. He's awesome. Gio Urshela, we got him off the scrap heap from the Jays. Ironically.
How do you turn Gio Urshela into a 30 home run guy? That's what I want to know. Okay, you got the Yankees can spend and spend and spend. That's fine. Not many teams can compete with that. But how in Tampa Bay, for if you want to talk about a team that can sprinkle magic on a bunch of players, but how do you do that to a Gio Urshela?
From the things that I've seen and read about, they just got his lower half more involved. Like, when you look at Gio's old swing and his whole approach before, it was just very much like he just didn't have his legs. He wasn't clearing his hips and turning them. And that's what he's gotten more focused in on. The glove's always been there. He's always been a like Gold Glove caliber defender. But now you get the offense in there, and he's hitting above 280. He's hitting over 20 homers. He's driving in 80 runs, and now it's like, boom, this is a guy. Here we go.
Yeah. I'm just going to leave that. That one, it's still like, I'm pretty sure that Fox Mulder has a poster, the I Want to Believe, and then Gio Urshela right next to it, because there's something freaky going on there. But anyway, let's talk about your Yankees here, Ed. Give me quickly, what are your thoughts on the 2020 season as far as, did they live up to what you expected in a 60-game season, if any team can live up to any expectations, right through to their bounce from the Tampa Bay Rays?
The regular season was, it was disappointing. You expect the Yankees would go into the division, and kind of like wreck shop in there and run away with that. But in a season, exactly, like you said, a 60-game season, anything can happen, and it did happen. Yanks were hit with a rash of injuries again, and that's been their bugaboo the last couple of years. But in 2019 and 2018, they were able to overcome it. Last year, it kind of came back to bite them. They had to fight, and it was, if you remember, there was a couple of weeks left, and it started to wonder, could they possibly not actually make the playoffs? And then they kind of turned it on for a solid week, and then they rebounded, they got in, and then they took care of the Indians, which they destroyed Shane Bieber in the first wild card series game. That was, listen, the lineup could do whatever, it can get to any pitcher. That's it. It's a tough lineup, whatever you want to look at, but when you got a team that does strike out a lot going against a guy like that, you wonder if that's just the kind of like the mix. We both know top elite pitching is going to stop elite hitting usually 9 out of 10 times. At this time, Bieber made his first career postseason start, and the Yanks got to him, and they tagged him up, and then they came back and they had to outslug the Indians again. But they couldn't do it with the Rays, man. The Rays pitching was just, it was too much. And game 2 of that series, though, when the Yankees announced that Deivi Garcia was going to start, and then they pulled this crap where they used him as a sneaky opener, and then they brought in Jay Happ, which you guys are familiar with as well. They bring in Jay Happ against the lineup. They were expecting Kevin Cash to crap the bed essentially and just start changing all those things. They didn't flinch. They just all right, we're going to hit Jay Happ, and they did hit Jay Happ. I personally would have been I would have been better off seeing the kid, because Garcia did show me a lot last season. I was really excited about him, and a lot of Yankee fans were excited for his debut, and he was living up to it a lot. There's a lot of excitement about him going into this season too, but I would have been fine with Garcia going out there and he would have took the lumps and I would have been fine with that. But to see J Happ come into some weird maneuvering that you've never done during the season either, it's like honestly the Boone and Cashman and the brain trust of the Yankees just completely, they overthought it and it came back to bite them. And then they get down to Game 5, they lose 2-1, and then Brazeau turns around a 100-mile-an-hour fastball in on his hands from Chapman. I mean, what are you going to do in that situation? If the guy's going to turn around a fastball and 100 miles an hour on his hands, then you tip your cap and and so be it. My answer is score more than one run. Aaron Judge hits a solo homer. You need more offense than that.
Absolutely. No, I mean, and within what you've said, there's a lot there. The good pitching and all of that stuff. Just wait, buddy, until the New York Yankees have to face Tanner Roark.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see pitching then.
Yeah, exactly. and I think we'll get to the Yankees rotation here in a little bit, but briefly the subtractions that the Yankees went through this offseason versus the new additions. I wonder if you could kind of speak to that a little bit, and are they better or worse off than they were in 2020? The loss of Tanaka, for example, who even the Blue Jays were rumored to be in on. The Blue Jays were rumored to be in on you and I as well.
Yeah, pretty much.
So right? So
pretty much.
But I wonder if you could maybe touch on that for a little bit.
So as far as the comparisons go, I mean, it's at this point in time, it's really going to be tough to say. I mean, I like the Yankees team going into the season on paper right now, but as we know, games are not won on paper. But Tanaka's is going to be a loss. I personally was a huge Masahiro Tanaka fan. I understand why it had to happen. I mean, they were figuring he was, his splitter and his slider just weren't there anymore. He was starting to lose some bite off of it, and they weren't willing to go to $15 million to $18 million. Yes, the Yankees were actually being cost conscious and trying to stay under the luxury tax, so they had to make some tough decisions. And the tough decision was Tanaka. It was like, listen, we can't go there for it. We're going to take our chances, which Cashman had said just a couple of weeks ago. For the price of Tanaka, which they loved him also, they got Corey Kluber and they got Jameson Taillon for the same price of it. If you just do the math, I understand where it's coming from. I mean, Taillon is costing them essentially nothing. And then Corey Kluber, they're taking a flyer on him. It's a 1-year deal, not a big deal, $12.5 million. And you see what you got. I mean, we're both familiar with Corey Kluber, two-time Cy Young Award winner. No, it wasn't last year, but it was a couple of years ago. He's had 2 injury-plagued seasons, but he is 34 years old. He's not 40. It's not like when we got Randy Johnson like in the mid-2000s. It's not that where we got him like 5 years too late. I'm pretty high on Kluber. And to tell you the truth, when I was under the impression that they were going to keep Tanaka, I wanted Kluber. Kluber was a guy who Tim and I discussed on our show where we wanted him. We wanted the Yankees to take the shot with him because we got a good feeling about him. I mean, his numbers, they do speak for themselves. I mean, he's got a career 3.16 ERA, a 109 whip, 98 and 58 career record. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So you take your chances with the guy. And the thing, too, with Kluber is that the guy who helped him, who's overseeing his rehab, also works for the Yankees. He works in their medical department. So it's like, all right, you guys trust me. You can give it a shot. Like, all things check out. Like, take the shot with him. And, that's a signing I'm really excited about. As far as Taillon goes, because, I mean, we would have figured if you would have got Kluber, Tanaka would have slid into that number 3 slot in the rotation. Jameson Taillon's a kid you could look at. I mean, he was drafted 2nd overall, right? Like, he was drafted right behind Bryce Harper, right ahead of Manny Machado. So somebody saw something there. It's not just Cashman, pulling, a name out of a hat here. He's, even though between Gio Urshela and Luke Voigt, he's done a good job pulling some names out of hats at times. I'll give him that. But I'm hoping this is another good find for him. I mean, he's also happens to be real good friends with Garrett Cole, and they've worked together. And Tim and I were talking about it yesterday. A lot of pitchers who are in Pittsburgh tend to not quite hit their potential. And then once they leave Pittsburgh, Garrett Cole is a prime example. Once he got out of there, then suddenly he flourished and became the elite pitcher that he is now. And then you can look at Tyler Glasnow with the Rays. Once he got away from Pittsburgh, same type of thing. So we're hoping Jameson Taillon is the one who could follow suit. Again, not an old kid. He's in his prime. He's 29 years old. And he's also reworked his mechanics. 2 Tommy John surgeries will do that to you. So, exactly. You're going to be like, all right, listen, I need to do something a little bit different here. So he's reworked his mechanics. So it's something. I mean, his best season was back in 2018. When he won 14 games. But I think it's something to look forward to. I mean, the kid seems to be thrilled to be here too. So I'm excited to see him pitch.
Well, I mean, would you rather pitch for the Yankees or the Pirates?
They kind of rescued him out of there, but but we've had some guys come through. The thing is with the Yankees and some of the guys that we do trade for free agents we signed, like when we got Sonny Gray, we were like, oh, all right, cool, Sonny Gray, like with the A's, and he was so dominant, and then he came here, and then he just kind of folded under the lights. He folded like a lawn chair. It was incredible, and he was very quiet about it. So when guys are quiet and they're not talking too much, even AJ Burnett, we saw firsthand, he was a head case, and then he would start losing it on the mound. You could just see him clear as day losing it on the mound. But Taillon has been outspoken about it, and Cole's taking him under his wing too. So it is something to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, AJ Burnett was probably always a head case anyway. But and I think of back to Chuck Knobloch, right?
Yes.
That might be the most prominent example in my head.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So while we're talking about these new additions, and we'll probably come back to the rotation, but I just wanted to ask you about this luxury tax thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of alluded to it previously when you're talking about not wanting to just spend, which has been the Yankees' way for a while. How much does that luxury tax hang over the decisions that they make?
So it's definitely become more prominent over, I want to say, the last 5 years or so, because if you remember back in 2016 when it was looking like we might sneak into the playoffs, we might not. That was during the Brian McCann, Carlos Beltran, Jacoby Ellsbury years, where it was just kind of hey, let's sign some guys to stay relevant until the crop of that's what it was. I mean, that's really what it was. Because you look at these additions and you're like, all right, we're obviously not going for it with this, so let's just hope to make the playoffs. And they made a wild card during that stretch, but we knew Judge was coming. Friends, we knew Judge was coming. We heard about Gary Sanchez for a while, Miguel Andujar, players of that nature. So we heard the names, but they just weren't ready yet. So they signed those guys to come in. But what they did at the trade deadline, though, is that Cashman did pull the plug and said, listen, this isn't happening. So let's get under the tax next year. Let's get under the tax. Let's start saving some money because, like I mentioned earlier, Hal Steinbrenner is a numbers guy. He will look at that bottom line and say, listen, yes, we're the Yankees. We're worth $5 billion. We understand all of that. But it doesn't mean we have to just throw money away or give money away to teams like the Rays who are just willing to not spend a dime. Or, I mean, even to pay the luxury tax goes to you guys too. It's just, we're going to pay teams to compete to us. And he's literally said, why are we paying teams to try to beat us? Let's not do that. And let's just, for that amount of money, you should be able to do it. And then, we traded off Beltran, traded off McCann, traded off Chapman, got Gleyber Torres, got Clint Frazier back in return. And it helped fuel that whole thing, that the core that we have now. And the day after that happened, and then A-Rod, we got him to retire finally and go away, and he could do his Ha thing to somewhere else. And don't worry, we're not huge fans of his either. We do thank him for showing up in 2009. We do get that, but overall, no, he's not beloved exactly by Yankee fans.
Fair enough.
So and it's funny because the big signature moment then was when those trades happened and A-Rod, was gone. The next day, Aaron Judge got called up and Tyler Austin, and they went back to back and they hit 2 home runs back to back the next day afternoon. It was just oh, the sun is shining on Yankee Stadium again. A-Rod is gone. And I don't even know if you remember when the night that they did a little ceremony, his last game. I remember I was there with my father, and you could, the 5 minutes before the ceremony started, you started hearing thunder. And downpour came right as the ceremony was starting, and it cleared up like 20 minutes later. And it was like so poetic. It was unbelievably poetic. We're just like, get the heck out of here, man.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And listen, if A-Rod were playing on my team, I would be doing the exact same thing, firing him out of a cannon. We're talking to Ed Camus, co-host of the Empire 161 show, talking Yankees and Blue Jays, and Ed's also the host of the Granny's Peach Tea podcast, both available on popculturepros.com. Excuse me. Ed, I want to ask you, because in my mind, a lot of the Yankees' success in 2021 will hinge on the health of Stanton and Judge.
Absolutely.
First of all, I mean, what's it going to take to keep them on the field at the same time for a long period of time? And how pivotal is the 2021 season to their health?
I mean, their health is going to be paramount to whatever it is that they do. I know back in 2019, they both went down, and we were able to, with guys like Mike Tauchman and stuff, like stepping up and like holding things afloat. You can't bank on that every single season. I think we got a taste of that last year when they both went down, and then we almost didn't make the playoffs. And when 16 teams make the playoffs, it almost didn't happen that year. So the things you've heard about this offseason are, so before last season, the Yankees pretty much fired their entire training staff. And we're like, listen, these injuries are getting out of control. Then we need to bring in some new guys. So they did. Now
that's
we both know
statement.
That's a huge statement. And immediately, that's Hal Steinbrenner. He doesn't mess around. So they go ahead, they clean house. But then with COVID, not everyone got to work out together and like be face to face and do this whole thing. But we're starting to learn how to coexist with it right now. But now they've had a full off season together. And this is going to sound probably hilarious, and I'm sure you're going to crack up in a second. But what we're being told though is that, and this is from their own mouths, from Judge and Stanton's mouth, they've done yoga, they've adopted yoga, less weightlifting, more yoga. So less, don't want to look like those old He-Man action figures instead, and let's look, to be more flexible, more, more limber out there. And now if you look at it, though, right, so Judge's injuries are one thing. Judge's injuries have been a lot of freak accidents. He got hit on the wrist with a pitch that, broke his wrist, so that's going to happen to anybody, right? That's just bad luck. He had the collapsed lung with diving for a ball in the outfield, and it just, again, I don't know there's no training you could do not to do that, unless you just tell him don't dive for the ball. The guy's 6'7", 290 pounds over there. He's a linebacker. It's going to happen. So, but that's what they've adopted now. On Stanton's thing, though, it's always a muscle pull, calf strain, things of that nature. So it's like, again, don't be as tight and try to be more flexible and loosen up. And we also got a reminder again, because a lot of Yankee fans, I don't know what you guys hear up there, a lot of Yankee fans are down on Stanton a lot. They're starting to treat him like he's A-Rod already. And it's kind of crazy to me. I mean, personally. I mean, I've seen what the guy can do. I've been a fan of his as a huge fan of fantasy baseball and everything. I'm familiar with Giancarlo Stanton. I've had him on my team a bunch of times, and I've seen him just crush it. He can still be that guy. I mean, in the playoffs against the Indians, and even he still hit against the Rays. I mean, he was showing hey, remember me? I can be this guy again. And I've said to our fans as well, understand something. You need to let up on Giancarlo Stanton. The Yankees will not win the World Series unless he returns to form. The team is structured around it. You've built it like this. You've invested this much in this guy. That's just the nature of the beast. He has a no-trade clause. He's not going anywhere. So you need to start cheering for this guy and getting behind him and rooting for him and wanting him to be the player, that we thought we were getting when we traded for him.
Right. The reaction to when he strikes out 5 times in a game is priceless.
Hey, yeah. I've been at the stadium with a lot of this too, and don't get me wrong, I'm pissed off also. I'm not acting like I'm not, but I mean, it's just all right. I mean, it sucks, man, but he's going to strike out a lot. It's just the nature that we know this in baseball too. There's a lot of strikeouts are through the roof now, and he can look really bad in his 0 for 5 and strike out 5 times, but then he could also mash 3 balls that might land in Rogers Center from Yankee Stadium. I mean, that's how he hits these moonshots too when he gets hold of them.
That's right. That's right. So now in my notes, I want to ask you about Gary Sanchez, but I actually wrote down WTF is Gary Sanchez,
Yep.
because I got to be honest with you. If I were a Yankees fan, and obviously I'm on the outside, right?
Mhm.
I don't follow them closely, but I continuously scratch my head over Gary Sanchez. So I need you to explain him, Ed.
Wow, if I could explain Gary Sanchez, man, I would probably be working for the Yankees right now. They would want to get me in there like as soon as possible. Like you're the guy that can figure him out because we've been trying to do whatever the hell we can do, man. Um, he's an interesting case. I mean, if you remember what he did when he came up in 2016, I mean, he looked like he was going to be the next big thing. And we heard about, like I mentioned earlier, we heard about him coming up. We knew his catching, his defense was always going to be a problem. He was never going to be confused with Pudge Rodriguez or anything like that. That was never going to happen. But it was like, listen, if you can hit enough, you can forget about that. And then 2017, he had a solid season too. I mean, if your catcher is hitting over 30 home runs and hitting, 260, 270, and driving in over 100 runs, man, that's the guy you want. I see why the Yankees are so intrigued by what they believe he is. And then 2018 and then 2019 and 2020 happens. And the guy, I mean, he couldn't hit his way out of a wet paper bag. It was insane. It's from what I've seen from the guy, he just became too home run conscious. He went with the whole launch angle and changed his entire approach. He used to use the whole field. He would drive the ball to right center field. He would just hit the ball where it's pitched with authority constantly. And now it just seems like he's trying to pull every single pitch, no matter what. And every swing is designed to be a pulled home run. And like, that's just baseball 101, man. That can't happen. So, and that's what it is. I think he's just become too obsessed with this launch angle. And they're also changing his catching mechanics. They have him on this new wave, having one knee down on your right knee and catching like that to try to frame pitches better at the bottom of the zone. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what is this crap? The guy's struggling at his is, and now you're trying to fill his head with all this crap? I kind of understand why he's a little bit confused, man, or why he's struggling about it. So
yeah. I mean, if you're worried about Gary Sanchez framing pitches, you're kind of not paying attention to the full package.
Yeah, exactly. You're not getting it, man. Like, just be an adequate catcher and just mash at the plate. That's the kind of catcher that he's meant to be.
Yeah.
And it's just, but this is it though. This is his last year in his contract, so it's sink or swim for him now, man. Like, this is it. If he doesn't come through and show them what it is, and then you got to think about it, right? Let's just say he does put together a good season and he does find a way to rebound. Are the Yankees going to be like, all right, we've seen enough. This is our guy. We're going to sign this guy to a 5-year deal? I don't know. That's going to be a massively tough decision, because if you've found him and he's unlocked it again, you don't want that getting away.
No.
So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, somebody who gets paid a lot more than I do is going to make that decision, but I wouldn't want to be that person.
No.
Because that, like, oh boy. So Ed, I think what we'll do, I've got a few viewer questions here I'll throw at you before we wrap up here. From Karen on Facebook, how do you think the Yankees and Blue Jays position players compare to each other, just overall speaking? Because I think one of the calling cards for the Blue Jays is going to be their offense, because it's not going to be their starting rotation, I can tell you that. But I would also argue that the Yankees may be in a similar position, not apples to apples, but in a similar position that the offense is going to lead the team. So quickly, how do you think those two position player lineups stack up?
As far as the position players go, I mean, they're both going to be really, really comparable. I mean, both teams are going to smash a bunch of home runs. They're both going to score a ton in different ways. I mean, the Yankees defense is going to be it's been a question. It was really bad last year. They're going to have to get that back up. It was pretty awful last year. But like we talked about earlier, it's going to be on the health. I mean, I would give the Jays the nod in the offensive department only if Stanton and Judge are not in their lineup. If Stanton and Judge are proved to be healthy, like we said earlier, that's the key. So if they're healthy, then I think the Yanks get the edge.
Fair enough, and I couldn't disagree with that. If you can have those two in the lineup, 70 home run potential, right? Like that's tough to to stack up against. Another one from Bob Ritchie. What are the relative weaknesses of the 2021 Yankees? Is it the starting rotation? Is it defense? What are your thoughts?
I would honestly say the defense. The defense has potential, but Gleyber Torres defensively is a bit of a question mark out there. Luke Voigt is a DH with a glove. I mean, I'm a big fan of his, but that's just the truth. He's like Jason Giambi kind of all over again. But the rest of their defense would be solid. Well, also Gary Sanchez behind the plate. So that's 3 out of 9, defensive players that you're going to have that will be considered a little bit subpar. The one to actually come through out of those 3, I would give Gleyber the one who would be the one that's all right. He can ascend to be an adequate shortstop or an above average shortstop. As far as the rotation goes with the Yanks, it's going to be on health, man. It just seems like that's the key to the Yankees in general is health. Because if Corey Kluber is Corey Kluber or even anything close to it, they're going to be outstanding. Because I like Jordan Montgomery as their 4th starter, and if it's Deivi Garcia or Clark Schmidt or if it ends up being Domingo Germán, I think this is a solid rotation. I mean, and if you notice, Garrett Cole was an afterthought because Garrett Cole as the ace. I mean, from what he saw last year, he's lights out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, there's no point in talking about that, and that's kind of where we are.
We've all seen where he is. Yeah,
yeah, that's right. Last one here from Keith, watching on YouTube. If the Yanks lose Cole to a long-term injury with all the quote-unquote ifs they have, i.e. Tyon, Kluber, and Judge, do the Yankees even make the playoffs?
I would say they would be borderline. There's a chance they would not make it if not for Cole. I don't like to put it on one starter, even a guy as enormous as Cole is to the Yankees and as great as he is. If you lose one guy, that shouldn't collapse an entire team. I mean, you're going to have to slug a little bit. And the Yanks do have some young arms like Michael King, like I mentioned, Clark Schmidt and Deivi Garcia and stuff. So they do have some depth, but a loss of Cole would be tremendous. I would see them more of a wild card team then, though, and not winning the division. But the division is what it is. I mean, we both know, I mean, the way I see it, you guys would be the only challengers I would imagine that would be in this division. The Red Sox have taken steps back. The Orioles are the Orioles. I mean, And the Rays traded away half their team, but we both know that they're going to pull some magic out and suddenly find a way to be competitive. It's just the way it is.
The Rays, so in my mind, and this will lead me to the final question here of our show, the Rays in my mind, on paper right now, probably 3rd in the division. With Yankees, Blue Jays, Rays, Red Sox, and then the Orioles, because we have to write them in there, right?
Exactly.
But you bring up an excellent point that the Rays somehow figure things out, right? So, they could surprise again, and they were at a point a few years ago where they would surprise and be in the conversation. And then it was, people still didn't believe that they were the best team. And now I think they're back to that being a surprise thing. So my final question to you though, is because I was on, what was it? Beat the Heat podcast just yesterday, talking about whether or not the Blue Jays can actually contend for the division. And I have to answer honestly that I think they're a wild card team, but if things go right, and part of the things going right is that the Yankees deal with the injuries that we know they can deal with and whatnot, they very well could win the division. Yeah. So my question to you is, Ed, convince me that the Yankees are going to win this division, because I'm not convinced.
I mean, again, if we're looking at the teams on paper right now, the Yanks would have the edge in starting pitching over the Blue Jays. I think we would have a huge edge in their bullpen as well. I mean, just pitching in general, because we can both say the offenses are both going to slug no matter what. Yes, 2 of our biggest sluggers with Judge and Stanton, they do need to stay healthy. But the Yankees after that, let's just say unfortunately they don't. You still have Gleyber Torres, you still have Luke Voigt, DJ LeMahieu, your buddy Gio Urshela, and then and then we see what happens with Gary Sanchez, Aaron Hicks, Clint Frazier. So it's not like they'll become like a National League team all of a sudden, like eight guys short. But I think it's honestly the reason I give the Yankees the edge though is just the starting pitching. Cole, Kluber, Tyone, Montgomery. I just think it's there. As far as the Jays go, I mean, Ryu's a good arm. He's a good pitcher. After that, though, that's where I think there's a lot of question marks with the Jays rotation. And in the bullpen, we still have Chapman. We still have Zach Britton. We still got Chad Green. We added Darren O'Day, who we were both very familiar with all his years with the Orioles. He's 38. It seems like he's like 60, but I mean, he still gets guys out. And that's a nice pickup for the two, getting Justin Wilson. So the Yanks bullpen, I feel, is really deep again, like they've been. They just, they just need to not rely on it for all 162 games. Manage it, but just don't rely on them giving you pitching 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th inning that's every day. So for me, that's what it is. It's the Yankees win this division simply because of the pitching and overall.
And I would argue that the Yankees, I think, are built for the more traditional starter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Outside of Ryu, the Blue Jays don't really necessarily have a plan for somebody who can go 7 innings.
Yeah.
Their bullpen is even constructed in a way that will allow for that piggyback / opener / whatever you want to call it, right? And whether or not that works, who knows? Because if we even just as recently as this postseason, the Blue Jays had a plan of one time through the order kind of thing, and I know teams are starting to really, really adopt that, whether it works or not. But I think that to me is the kind of the fundamental difference between these pitching staffs for Toronto and New York, and I guess we'll have to wait and see how they go.
Can't wait.
And you know what? We will get you back on for sure, because we're not done talking about this Blue Jays Yankees, because I feel like it's going to be 2021. It's going to be the year where those two teams just go at each other, and it's going to be awesome. And I can't wait for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think they're definitely two of the better teams in all of the American League, not even just the AL East.
For sure. Yeah. So, Ed, very quickly, first of all, thank you for joining me this week, and I did my best to talk about the Yankees in a professional manner. So hopefully you enjoyed yourself, and we'll come back at another point.
Absolutely. Listen, I had a great time, man. Have me on any time. Just let me know.
For sure.
So maybe we'll have you on Empire also.
Oh, I'm there. I'm there.
Okay.
All right. Let everybody know, Ed, how they can follow you and all of the awesome stuff that you do over at Pop Culture Pros.
Yeah, so if you wanted, if you liked Jardier, come check us out. We're on Facebook. You can like our fan page on Empire 161 Show. It's a group. Join it. Join the conversation. We encourage everyone to share articles, and let's talk about it a bunch. We have our show once a week. That'll be getting into the once a week gear. Once we start the season, we're not going to really do a show every week during spring training. So you can come over and check us out there, or check us up on Pop Culture Pros on YouTube or Instagram. You can check me out on Twitter at ecamus23. And if you're into comic book movies or shows, if that's your jam, then come check out Granny's Peach Tea. Same type of thing. Check out on YouTube, Instagram, check under Pop Culture Pros, and then you can see the playlist that's there on the Granny's Peach Tea.
And I got to say to all of our listeners, Ed and I were talking before we went live, and this guy knows his stuff. So if you're into TV and movies, particularly of the superhero genre, you have to check out Ed's at Granny's Peach Tea on Pop Culture Pros. Ed, thanks so much for joining me this week. This is the 250th episode of our podcast, and I'm really happy with the way we celebrated it. So thank you very much.
And thank you so much for having me. It's a landmark episode, and best of luck with everything else with the season.
Absolutely. Thanks to you. Thanks to all of our commenters and our questioners on YouTube and Facebook. We really appreciate it. We come at you live every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't miss the On Feck Circle, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. and Sunny Side of the Dome, Thursdays 7 p.m. We've got that time slot locked down. And you can send your questions to the On Fact Circle at US of J's on Twitter and their Facebook page, and at Karen Sutar1 for the Sunny Side of the Dome. Don't forget this audio version of this podcast available on Google, Apple, Spotify. You know the drill. Subscribe, and you'll get all of our episodes automatically. So for Ed, for everybody else, for Gary Sanchez, my guy, Gary Sanchez, my MVP. I can't even say that with a straight face. This is Sean Doyle. You can follow me on Twitter at Doyle JFtC. Hoping life gives you a juicy fastball down the middle and you don't miss it. Take care.